Okay, so let's make a start. Good morning, everybody. My name's James Cadman. I work for Action Sustainability in the Supply Chain Sustainability School. We're here today to talk about climate finance, and I'll get onto some of that in a minute. I'm just going to take you through a few brief house rules while we've got your attention at the beginning. So do please participate in our poll questions. We're going to have some Mentimeter a little bit later on. If you've ever been on a school webinar or lunch and learn, you'll have done Mentimeter. But I'll give instructions for those of you who haven't in due course. We will be sharing the slides and recording afterwards. The slides will be circulated as a PDF to all those who attended, and a link to the recording as well. So please do take notes, take any screenshots you want, but you will get a copy later. That will be fine. And importantly, this is your opportunity to put your questions to our speakers. As we do with many of our webinars, we have got the Q&A function in Zoom. So please do use that to put in your questions. You can also upvote them if you like them with a thumbs up. They'll go higher up in the list and I'm more likely to see them and more likely to put them to the panelists. So please do use that function. The chat function is there just for us to communicate any messages out to you, as Alice has been doing already. So please use the Q&A. In terms of Mentimeter, we'll get onto this a little bit later, but just so you know, you go to menti.com on your phone or on your laptop. You can open up a separate tab on your browser. You put in the 8-digit PIN that you can see on the screen, or use the QR code if you prefer using QR codes. So if you want to start thinking about getting that ready, there'll be a question during our first presenter's slide deck, and then we'll have some more questions later on. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit. I'm going to leave that on the screen there so you guys can log in effect. I'm just going to talk to you about a little bit of the context of where we're at the moment. As you'll be aware, COP29 is happening right now in Baku in Azerbaijan. And it's interesting that climate finance, and it's no coincidence that climate finance is one of the main topics of discussion at those meetings, that fortnight of meetings. Just want to take you back a little bit. Back in 2009 in Copenhagen at the COP there, the idea of providing climate finance to developing and poorer nations was raised as a topic and indeed agreed. And it was agreed that at that point that developed nations would give $100 billion a year to developing poor nations. That's about 78 billion pounds to make the conversion. And that was to help those developing nations with mitigation, so putting in measures to reduce their own carbon emissions, but importantly adaptation as well, to adapt to the increasing effects of climate change, whether that's storm surges, heat waves, droughts, hurricanes, and so on. It took some time for that money to finally materialize, and it did in 2023, and last year we got to 100 billion US dollars. Interestingly, it was also expanded a couple of years ago when we had the COP in Egypt, and this concept of loss and damage came in as well. So not just mitigation and adaptation, which is a kind of a forward-looking provision of finance. You know, what can we do to help reduce emissions in the future and adapt to future weather events? But also a loss and damage fund, and basically saying how can we help those poorer nations recover from incidents that have happened. So it's looking backwards. How can we compensate them for that? That was finally agreed after a lot of wrangling over the concept of admitting guilt. Fundamentally, that was agreed a couple of years ago. But now in COP29, we're talking about even more money than that. A report came out this morning from some eminent economists talking about the need for $1 trillion US. That's 10 times as much as 100 billion per year by 2030 to fund these mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage requirements. So that's come out, and that's being discussed now. Where does that money come from? You know, it could be a combination of national governments, development banks like the World Development Bank, private finance, and then taxation on various sectors of the economy that are high carbon emitting industries. So that's where the negotiations are at. Interestingly, what counts as a developed nation or a developing nation, that's very much up for discussion as well. Bringing it slightly closer to home, you might have seen the news that Keir Starmer, when he did his 3-minute presentation in Baku, announced the UK's revised nationally determined contribution targets. We now have a new target of 81% reduction in our own greenhouse gas emissions by 2035 compared to a 1990 level. So it's tightening the thumb screws a little bit here, but he was announcing that ahead of the target deadline next year. And then just finally, bringing it closer to home, there's a report that came out only a couple of weeks ago from the Green Finance Institute that was urging the UK government and its ministers to unlock private finance in terms of retrofitting and renovating property in the UK. It's something called property-linked finance. That's fundamentally shifting the finance that's given towards these schemes from the owner to the property itself. So that's something that's developing. It's something that happens in other countries already, like the US, but it's something that currently doesn't really happen in the UK. So thinking about how we can get the best from our climate finance for the challenges that we have, and retrofit being clearly one of those. So that's the scene setting. Lots going on the global stage, lots happening at the UK level as well, and of course in our own individual businesses. We're going to hear from 3 speakers today who are going to talk to you about their different perspectives on climate finance, kind of inward looking and outward looking, taking in different angles, different lenses to look at that. So as you can see on the slide now, we've got speakers from Kia, from NatWest and from Lloyds, and they're going to take you through their different perspectives. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to Ben Stone, who's Head of Environmental Sustainability at Kia, who's going to take you through his approach and how they're working on climate finance in Kia. So Ben, I'm going to stop sharing.
Great.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, I'm trying my best and I think I'm getting there.
That's there. Yep, that's good.
Great. Okay, so thanks, James. When James asked me to speak at this event, I was a bit nervous, to be honest, because I'm not a climate finance expert like we've got here from NatWest and from Lloyds, but what I did say is I can kind of try and share a little bit of my own learning as I've gone through the process of trying to sort of obtain backing and funding within a construction business and talking to our leaders about what we need to do. So I'm going to try and do that over the next sort of 15 minutes and just talk a little bit about building reputation and why it's important, getting leadership buy-in, stuff around climate innovation, and then finish with just one slide on climate finance and sort of obtaining it externally and what I've seen. Before I do that, a little bit on who Kia are. So we are a large construction business, 400 live projects across the UK, £4 billion of revenue. Our purpose is to sustainably deliver infrastructure that's vital to the UK. And like most other businesses, we do love a sustainability badge that you can see on the right-hand side. So we hold the London Stock Exchange Green Economy Mark badge, which means that more than 50% of our revenue comes from projects with a net environmental benefit. Last year, we got that up to 69%. It's been increasing year on year for the last 3 years. We've done pretty well on carbon emissions so far. So we've cut our operational scope 1 and 2 emissions by 70% since 2019. And one I'm really proud of, really recently, we were announced as one of the 11 businesses that adopted the TNFD recommendations in Cali at COP16. So that's great. And we will start disclosing our nature impact opportunities in October next year. And just quickly, if we have a quick look at the sort of social sustainability side, we've increased the number of our employees that are in formal earn and learn positions. So we've managed to get that up to 12% this year. And you can see last year we held the gold badge for more than 5%. This year that'll go to platinum because it's more than 10% when it's reassessed. And we spent £1.4 billion with small and medium-sized enterprises or voluntary community and social enterprises last year. So really great to invest in local communities and make sure we're retaining some of that value around where we work and live. Okay, so James said, I'm going to ask you a question, and I am going to ask you a question on Menti. And you'll see why this comes into the sort of reputation first section of the presentation in a second. But we're going to go into Menti, and I'd like to understand what you think the difference is between carbon neutral and net zero. And I'll just bring that up on the screen quickly, just to show you again, where you need to go to get into Menti. And then I need to stop sharing, don't I, James? And
correct, yep.
You can take over for a second.
Will do. There we go. Thank you. So I'll just share back up again. Share that one. There we go. So there's the QR code. Hopefully you've been getting in. There's the PIN number if you prefer just tapping in 8 digits. I'm going to push on to the question. The code, for those of you who are not quite in there yet, don't worry. The code is in the chat. Alice has put it in the chat as well, and it will always remain on the top of this screen as well. So we won't leave you hanging. So, as Ben said, what's the difference between carbon neutral and net zero? You've got a word cloud here, so you can type in a couple of 2 or 3 words. I think you get several opportunities to type in words as well. And then we'll see a word cloud build.
I think this is quite a difficult question, to be honest. So we'll see what we get and how many experts we've got on the call.
Indeed. And by the way, if you type in a word the same as someone else and you spell it exactly the same, it will get a bit bigger, which is what we're seeing with offsets and offsetting.
Lots of opinions, mainly offsets versus reduction by the look of it, which I think is quite right. I think it's one of the points. And there's so many, I now can't read most of them.
Yeah, I can see scope 3 in there. Yeah, I think I need to go to Specsavers. Greenwash. There you go. You can pick up on that one, Ben.
Oh, yes.
Total reduction. Someone has said they're the same. Okay.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So we go back and I'll take over.
I'll stop
again.
sharing. Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah. Okay. This is going to take me a second. There we go. Jane, can you just shout and let me know that is sharing?
Yep, that's coming through fine.
Cool. Great. Okay. So I'm not going to go on. So I did have another slide that sort of showed the differences between carbon neutral and net zero. And then I started going and digging around on the internet and I found about 1 million different opinions on what it is. So I've gone back to SBTI and what they suggest the differences are. So there's kind of 3 key differences, I think. The first is carbon neutral. You can offset the whole lot. Net zero, you need to reduce as much as possible, and then you can neutralize up to 10% of your baseline emissions from your baseline year. So really different. You know, you can just emit what you want with carbon neutral and then offset the whole lot. Second one is that carbon neutral can use offsets from renewable energy investment. So if you are paying for a wind farm, that can generate carbon offsets and you can use that to offset your emissions. And I think that's a little bit sort of double bubbling because the user of that renewable electricity from that wind farm is also claiming those offsets. Whereas net zero commitments, you need to actually be removing or neutralizing emissions. So tree planting, carbon capture from the atmosphere, carbon capture on a chimney or a stack sort of thing. So you're actually taking carbon out of the air for net zero, whereas you can use a broader definition of offsetting than carbon neutral. And then the third one, carbon neutral apparently is just about CO2, whereas net zero is about all of the greenhouse gas emissions. So, you know, that's a much broader definition. The final one that I found in some places, but not on SBTI, was that carbon neutral is just about scope 1 and 2, whereas net zero covers scope 1, 2, and 3. And I think, you know, there were some really great answers on that word cloud, showed that we've got some really great expertise in the audience, but there are a lot of different opinions about that one differentiation. And we have lots and lots of commitments out there that we can all commit to now. And there's just a few examples on the screen there. But if we, as a relative self-selecting group, are unsure about the difference between 2 of them, how can we expect our stakeholders to understand all of them? And there's a risk that when we sign up to these commitments and we don't necessarily do the due diligence and know what we're signing up to, that we can undermine confidence in our performance and in our sector or in the economy's performance. And that's kind of what we're starting to see now. So we've seen businesses that have signed up to some of these commitments that are then having to roll back on them because they haven't done the due diligence before they've signed up. And you can see an article from the Financial Times there on the screen about companies rolling back. And there's another one, a white paper that came out last week from a consultancy called Eden 7, where they were looking at the FTSE 250 and saying these large listed businesses in the UK, we're seeing that across those 250 businesses, we've actually seen a 7% increase in emissions that's in line with revenue growth. 40% of them haven't even set a net zero target. and 20% of them are not even reporting their Scope 3 emissions yet. So we need to go faster, but we need to do it in a way which is robust and which kind of makes sure that our stakeholders, whether they're internal or their lenders or their shareholders or their clients, have confidence in what we're doing. And that's what we're starting to see. So all of these teal coloured standards that are on the screen, they're much more robust, and they're really about quantifying your performance and being able to prove to your stakeholders that you are walking the talk, that it's not just a commitment, that you know what you're doing and you know how you're going to achieve it. And I think my sort of key point around this is really that we need to make sure that we know what we're signing up to. It's very easy to undermine a reputation. It's very hard to build a reputation. So we've got to make sure we know what we're signing up to, got to do the due diligence before we do. And if you have one of those commitments and you don't feel that you're going to be able to meet it, don't wait until the 11th hour to withdraw from it. Do it early and explain why you're doing it and explain what you're going to do instead. Okay, second one, getting leadership buy-in. I have worked in sustainability for 20 years, and sustainability professionals, we are a passionate lot. We just want to get on and do. We don't really want to write a business case or do the due diligence unless we are forced to. We just want to make a difference. And these are some of the things that I've heard from sustainability people over the course of my career. I hear things like, we're doing it because it's the right thing to do, and that should be enough. If we can't achieve this green initiative by then, why on earth are we even here? And this commitment will make it. Don't we know what it is, but we'll make it, and then it'll force us to take action. And I have kind of learned over the course of my career that for a CFO or a chief executive, passion's great and it gets you in the door, but it's not going to win them over. They need confidence in what you're doing and they need to see the numbers. And if you're asking your leaders to make an investment decision or a commitment, they need to understand how it's going to work for their business, and they're going to have confidence in it that it's feasible and what the costs are going to be. And a really simple way to kind of explain that, I think, for most people on call will be, if you wanted to buy a house and you wanted to get a mortgage and you went to the bank and you said, just give me the money, I'm not going to bother doing all those surveys, they would tell you where to go. So it's the same in a business. You've got to provide your leaders with confidence that you understand the context and you understand how that commitment is going to be delivered. And the final piece on this slide really is around fiduciary duty. So our sustainability people in our businesses need to understand that our leaders have a duty to make sure that they are delivering to the business and acting in the best interest of the business, whether that's a duty to shareholders to make money or to keep people employed or to manage risks and make sure they're taking opportunities. And a part of that is sustainability, but it's not all of it. So we need to understand that they're managing this much greater scope and they have different priorities to us, and we need to work with them to do that. So an example, we at Kia this week, we've just signed a contract to buy 3 million litres of sustainable, and that's a really important word here, sustainable HVO, hydrogenated vegetable oil, to replace diesel over the next 12 months. And that's going to save as much carbon emissions as driving 15 million fewer miles. So really great, but it's taken us about 18 months to get to this point. So 18 months ago, we were about to do this and sign a deal. And we did a load of due diligence to check that we could make sure that HVO was sustainable, and we got a bit nervous, so we pulled back from it at that point. We could see that there were risks in the supply chain of cutting down rainforests to plant palm plantations, of forced labour risks, of nature impacts, but also of increasing carbon if we're cutting down rainforests on peat soils. So we went and approached the supply chain school and some of our peers and said, let's work together to assess this risk, understand how we put additional controls in place, and then come back. And we did that, and we took our leaders on that journey with us, so they understood what we were doing and how we were going to get here. The latest bit, just going through, so we've done the due diligence now, we've got a really robust standard in place. We had 9 suppliers of HVO, we've now got 2 that passed that enhanced due diligence. And the really great thing that we've seen coming out of that is that we've got real buy-in at all levels of the business now. They can really see that there are actions that we can take that will address our carbon footprint and reduce carbon. And our transport managers are really pushing the sustainability teams to say, well, what is the next step on this? Can we share refueling infrastructure across our business divisions so that if we've got a bulk fuel tank of HVO on a highways depot, can one of our construction vehicles that's doing housing maintenance pull in and fill up with HVO instead of going to a commercial forecourt to fill up, so that we save money, but we also reduce the carbon emissions from that vehicle. So really great project, got real great buy-in. Taking your leaders on that journey is really important. So few tips on this section. Nobody likes surprises. So if you go into a board meeting or an executive meeting and you surprise your leaders with a proposal, they're not going to be particularly happy because they're going to want to go and think about it. So do the work up front, have your allies in the room, really important. Be the expert in the room. So make sure that you do your homework and you prep for all of the likely questions. And what is really important, if you don't know the answer to a question, don't try and blag it. Just say you don't know and you'll go and find out and you'll come back and answer it. And the third one, this has tripped me up in the past. It can be really helpful to have an external expert in the room with you. So someone you've worked with to develop a proposal and get it to the point where you want to take it to your executive team. But you need to make sure they understand all the context and they're totally on message, because they can very easily go in there and say something that undermines that business case based on conversations you've had without them in the past. So really important to prep them and make sure they're on message. Third one I wanted to talk about, so financing climate innovation. So this is essential. We have to innovate if we're going to reduce our carbon emissions and our carbon footprint. But innovation costs more money because you've not done it before. So you've got to invest to do something different. And it adds risk because when you do something new, there's more of a chance that it's going to fail. And I just want to talk through a couple of examples from my career in this. So about a decade ago, I worked in social housing for an organisation called Wakefield District Housing. And just as I joined, they finished building what was the largest net zero carbon housing estate at the time. So it was level 6 co-sustainable homes. Brilliant estate. Tenants loved living in it. But it did have problems. So it had a biomass boiler on that site. And anybody who's worked with a biomass boiler in those sort of days will understand they need a lot of love to keep them running. Took loads of maintenance. We had mechanical ventilation in homes because they were so airtight, and the placement of the vents in the bedrooms was over the bed. So it blew cool air down on people as they were sleeping. And that meant that all of those across every home had a bit of cling film over the vent and an elastic band around it. So it stopped blowing air in, which wasn't great for air quality. And the one that caused us the most problems was grey water flushing toilets. So these were really innovative at the time. And we put them into all of the homes on that estate. So it took water from the washing machine, from the sink, from the bath, and used it to flush the toilets to reduce water consumption. And that sounds great in theory, but unfortunately, because they were so innovative, there was one engineer that could service them across the whole of the UK. So when one broke down, that household had no toilet for quite a while because he couldn't get there very quickly. The bit that really stumped us for a while was we had quite a few complaints from residents saying, my toilet is flushing purple. And we couldn't work out why until we realised that it was residents that were dyeing their hair over the bath and then causing the toilet to flush purple for a few days afterwards. So something that didn't have any impact, but made people in the office laugh a bit and took a while to get around with tenants. But those toilets, in the end, we ended up ripping them all out because we just couldn't leave people living in those homes without a functioning bathroom. So innovation does add risk. A clear example, which I think is really great and really resonated with me, we ran a precast concrete roundtable a few months ago with PCE. And some of the outcomes from that I think are really great in terms of making sure that innovation works. So getting involved early and collaborating with your clients and with your supply chain and with your designers, because it's really hard to change a design once you're on site. Really important. Collaborating for scale. So repeatability in innovation is really important. If you do the same thing over and over again, you get better at it each time. So collaborating with a group of peers and trialing innovation on a number of projects so you can repeat it over and over again helps us to learn more quickly and implement that innovation. And the third one here, we talk about cement replacement in concrete all the time. We say we're just going to reduce the amount of cement in there and that'll be fun, that'll reduce the carbon. But that's not great for structural applications because we've had things like the rack problems recently where, our insurers have had issues. So why don't we just redesign and make sure that we don't have as much reinforcement in that concrete because we have less openings. So we group the services together and we're smarter with the design, and that reduces the embodied carbon in that concrete anyway. Final point on this really is working with insurers. So I talk to our insurers quite a lot, and they do get nervous because they carry the risk over the lifetime of a building or an infrastructure project. So if we're working with structural timber, their worry is water ingress and delamination, and they carry that. We're working in structure applications and doing cement replacement. Again, they're nervous because of the rack case studies implications that has. So they want confidence that it's going to be okay. So getting insurers involved early is really important. Otherwise, your renewals will be higher. So we need to make sure that we collaborate, that we learn fast, and that we share those costs and risks of innovating. Final slide from me. I'm sure James will be glad to, because I think I'm overrunning. A little bit on green finance. So the things that I've been learning from thinking about sustainability linked loans, green bonds, all those sorts of things that we want to have in place, we want to use more of to demonstrate our commitment, is that you need to have confidence in your baseline for target setting. If you're going to set a target on an environmental metric like scope 1 or 2 carbon or waste, and your baseline data isn't good, how are you going to be able to demonstrate progress? So it's really important that we have robust data in place. We need to set stretching targets, but they also need to be realistic. And this is an example here, which I think is pertinent. We get pushed quite a lot to have scope 3 targets for sustainability linked loans and green bonds. Because so much of our spend is with SMEs and VCSEs, we really struggle to get robust carbon data out of those subcontractors because they're so small. But we know we've got to work with them because they provide loads of social value into local communities. So there's this real difficult conversation we increasingly have where we want to set a scope 3 carbon target to reduce our emissions, but we're struggling to get really strong data out of 60% of our subcontractors where they're smaller businesses. We've seen people setting science-based targets with subcontractors. Well, I'm really reluctant to do that as well because it's a huge additional burden in terms of setting targets, understanding your carbon footprint, reporting on it each year. So costs to sign up to SBTi, but then also costs for consultancy to support that process going forward. So my points on this really are: focus on your data integrity. Make sure that you understand that auditors are going to want to sample and verify the raw data, not just look at a spreadsheet. Make sure you understand the implications if you miss a target, because there are financial implications there, but there's also massive perception implications that can undermine your reputation. And agree the basis for assurance and the methodology, the boundary and scope as you go through this process. And if you want to see an example of that, we've published our carbon footprint report. We verify our carbon footprint to ISO 14064, and all of the methodology, all the data is available on our website to be transparent about what's in scope, what's out of scope, how we calculate the carbon factor, the methodology that we use. So just to finish, 5 key takeaways. Nobody likes surprises when you're bringing a business case. Speak to your leaders in advance. Pick your battles. Really focus on what's most material. You will not get everything over the line in a business. You will get a lot over the line because it's an increasing focus on sustainability, but make sure you really focus on what's going to make the biggest difference. Don't sign up to things just because everybody else has it. So I have this quite a lot from various people around the business, and that I speak to in other businesses, where they say, this company over here has signed up to this commitment, why haven't we? Make sure you have that conversation, but don't be bullied into doing it if it's not right for your business. And then be open about risks and collaborate, share them, like we did in the HVO example with the supply chain school. And the final one there, be prepared to prove your performance against commitments. So be prepared for that walking the talk point, that you can't just sign up to equipment and hope for the best anymore. And I will stop talking there, James.
Super. Thank you very much, Ben. Interesting as ever. I see there's been some questions in the Q&A, and just to reiterate to anyone who joined the webinar a little bit late, please use the Q&A function, not the chat function, if you want to ask a question. So the Q&A is the one with a little speech bubble and the question mark in it. The chat is just for the panelists and for us to put a message out to you. I see there's been a great comment from Mike Jones about PAS 2060 and carbon neutrality, the fact that that's being superseded in the new year by an ISO standard that is in line with all the other life cycle assessment standards. So that's something to go on there. Before we move on to Carmen, I'm going to have a quick Menti session with you, just a couple more questions to post to you. So if I just share my screen again with you as the audience. That's obviously the one that you saw earlier. We've just got a few other questions to ask you. So if you've been logged out of Menti, or you closed the tab on your browser, it's the same place, menti.com. the number is at the top, the 8-digit pin is at the top. I'm just going to ask you 3 or 4 questions about climate finance from your perspective. So the first question is quite simple. How would you assess your knowledge of climate finance from 0 to 10? And what you should see on your screen now is a slider. You just drag it across with your finger. This is all anonymous. I should always say that this is always anonymous. No one's going to come knocking on your door if they think you should know more than you're saying you are, or anything else like that. So okay, 3.5, 3.6. So the blue dot in the middle is the average, and you might be able to make out there's a kind of an undulating slope in the background. That's the kind of the spread, the distribution. Okay, so some people have got some knowledge. No one's claiming they're experts, but everyone's got some knowledge. That's really good to know. Thank you. I'm going to push on to the next question. Why would you want to access sources of climate finance? What would be your reasons, or your organization's reasons for accessing climate finance? And there's a few different options there. Clearly, we can't be exhaustive, but there's a few different choices there. Whether it's mitigation actions, so you want to invest in low carbon materials, low carbon equipment. It could be renewable power, so directly, so solar PV, wind turbines, ground source heat pumps, whatever it might be. Adaptation and resilience, so that's the other side of the coin to mitigation, making sure that your business is adapted to more extreme and more frequent weather events. And then there's kind of some wider things here around business growth as well. Okay. So interestingly, there's a broad spread here. There's obviously some others there that we haven't picked up in the questions, but there's a broad spread. But the one that stands out is mitigation actions. So what can we do to reduce our own carbon impact? And that's where, as I was saying at the beginning, where the climate finance world globally has been. What's the mitigation that we can put in place to reduce our real, actual carbon emissions? Adaptation is always the poorer cousin to mitigation. Okay, great. On to the third question. Who would the climate finance be for? So we've talked about mitigation actions and adaptation and so on. Who would it actually be for? And you can see there's essentially 3 choices there. Is it you? Is it your suppliers? Is it your customer? Or is it potentially someone else? Okay, so very clear predominance for your own organization. So again, that ties into the mitigation piece as well. Investing in more efficient equipment, lower carbon materials and ways of working. Transport and distribution might be part of that as well. Okay, yeah, so that stands out quite clearly there. That's really useful to know. Super. Okay. Last 2 questions. What do you see as the advantages of climate finance? And this is a word cloud again. You get 25 characters per box to give some kind of response. Incentive, support, getting buy-in, supporting the transition, accelerating it, yeah. Change is happening. So despite some of the news stories we see, we do actually have some good news coming out. The UK, the US, Europe are actually reducing their emissions in absolute terms, not just relative terms, but absolute terms. Other parts of the world, the more developing nations, are still rising, of course. That's why we still have an issue, a crisis to deal with. But developed nations are managing to reduce and decouple that economic growth from carbon emissions. Understanding informed decisions, that's a really important point as well. So you can have more informed decisions. Reputation comes into it as well. Lots of good reasons. Excellent. So that's the positive side of the coin. And you won't be surprised when I pop up the next question, which is, what are the disadvantages of climate finance? What do you see as some of the potential drawbacks? How can we improve the system? Okay, so quite a clear message coming out straight away on greenwashing. Accountability, lack of accountability, some of the rules that go around this. How do we understand what we're doing, what we're actually investing in? I think I've seen the word risk come out 2 or 3 times in some shape or form. Availability of it, lack of understanding around what it is, where you get it from, the access to it. financial backing, I think I saw there. The font's starting to get a bit too small even for me. Open to scrutiny. So yeah, what's the assurance side of this as well? Okay, so there's clearly a good conversation to have here around the pros and cons of climate finance. It has lots of potential to support and work with us on that transition, but there's clearly aspects to it which need fixing. Okay, super. Thank you very much. I'm going to move away from that now, and I'm just going to put this into presentation mode. So our next speaker is Carmen Cheng, who's Head of Sustainability and Propositions at NatWest, and Carmen is going to take us through what they're doing at NatWest.
Thank you, James, and thank you very much, Ben, for sharing lots of good practical tips, including where to dye your hair as well. So I thought that was very interesting, very insightful, actually. Just hearing from you from what you're doing from a company's perspective in terms of assessing climate finance. So let's talk about it from a bank's perspective, and we'll start from the very top. So James, if you don't mind moving on to the next slide, please. So climate, as you can see from the bottom right-hand corner, alongside enterprise and learning, is a core pillar of NatWest's purpose-driven strategy, where we champion potential, helping people, families, and business to thrive. And as one of the largest banks in the UK, we believe that we have a key role to play in supporting our customers in their transition journeys, and ultimately is for them to become fit for the future. And in terms of our ambition, we also have a net zero target by 2050. And thanks, Ben, for clarifying the definition for us as well. And that is across our finance emission. So that includes scope 1, 2, and 3 as well. And in line with our ambition, we published our targets validated by Science Based Targets Initiative, SBTi, as science-based. And that also goes back to the point that we talked about previously about having the confidence and the credibility in what we do as well. And ultimately, as a bank, I think the key role that we see ourselves that is kind of performing in society is to facilitate that capital flow. So to provide the financing that's required. And the actions that we have been putting in place include the identification and provision of products and services that to support our customer to transition. So, for example, we have 100 billion climate and sustainable financing and funding target, which spans between July 21 to the end of 25, and we are most likely on track to meet that target. And we also have a provision of the engagement and education tools like Carbon Planner and Home Energy Hub as well. And we also try to enhance the linkage between our climate transition plan and the financial plan that we have. Next slide, please, James. So this chart is just to show that, the role of finance in tackling the climate challenge and talking about the bank's role in facilitating the capital flow. The chart on the slide shows that the amount of global finance committed has more than doubled in the last 5 years, reaching 1.4 trillion in 2022. And just to put it in context, it's about 1% of the global GDP. And whilst climate finance has been increasing, there's a big funding gap of about 200 billion identified by Allen and Overy and the Climate Policy Initiative between now and 2050. So both private and public bodies recognize this need for finance and increasingly looking for ways to deploy capital to support the climate challenge. And that's why it's so important to engage with businesses like yourselves to give us any insights you can provide to ensure the right financial products are available to those that need it the most. Next slide, please, James. Thank you. This is just a snapshot just to show some of the commitments made by a selection of banks to support sustainable finance. And this collectively accounts for approximately $14 trillion of committed sustainable finance between now and 2030. And just to repeat my earlier point, banks do recognize the need for finance and are clearly keen to deploy more capital to support. But ensuring the capital is pointing in the right place will be key to accelerate the transition. Next slide, please, Dave. Thank you. So this, again, another interesting chart just to show how different sectors' carbon footprints can vary in terms of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Just as a recap, your scope 1 and 2 emissions come from your own operation, energy use, manufacturing, processing, and scope 3 comes from the upstream or downstream use of your products and services. So as you can see across the chart across different sectors, there's no one size fits all. And for some sectors where Scope 3 makes up the majority of the carbon footprint, such as agriculture, real estate, for example, where Scope 3 makes up the majority of the carbon footprints, and then engaging your supply chain would be very crucial to drive the collective action to decarbonize. But more broadly, for both banks and companies, it's very important to think about the interconnectivity of carbon emissions. And it will be key to ensure that finance is flowing to where it's required the most to drive maximum impact. So how can we support our customers? Next slide, please, James. Thank you so much. So supporting our customers' transitions remains a very key driver, as I said before, and we continue to help our customers to make sustainable choices and providing a combination of finance and practical tools, and they fall into the below few categories as outlined in the slides. First of all, let's start with education and awareness. So the retrofit training program with Supply Chain Sustainability School is a good example of that. And we hope the businesses to have that vision and awareness to start with so that they can take action. So NatWest has conducted a future fit research recently and looked at the companies who are deemed future fit. And that cohort of companies actually have achieved significant growth in the past 12 months, 50% of them, versus the average of 28%. And it's because they have that long-term vision and awareness to look through the immediate survival of the businesses and to look at the sustainability angle of it, the technology, the talent, and their supply chain as well to make them successful. And some very interesting stats to share as well is that 78% of the future fit businesses actually agree that sustainability investment provide competitive advantage for them. 84% of the future fit businesses also prioritizes supply chain resilience over speed and cost. And also 75% of those businesses agree that data is key to their success. So moving on to the next column, which is number 2, measurement and understanding. We have a tool called Carbon Planner, which is free for all customers and non-customers, actually, which is an engagement tool that helps businesses, in particular smaller scale businesses, to measure their footprint with suggested actions to improve the emission, which we eventually link to sustainability solutions such as solar and EVs. We also have tools that helps to source and support the solutions, which is moving on to the 4th column there. And linking to that with the suggestions in Carbon Planner, we also link them to the potential solutions for solar, for example, where you can actually input a postcode and you can actually, there would be a high level survey that's done for you to show you where you can install your solar panel and how. And then ultimately links to the last column, which is the funding transition point, which is where it will link to our asset finance solutions as well to show you your financing solutions potentially with NatWest or non-NatWest suppliers as well. Next slide, please, James. And the other point that we're trying to make also is that the answer to net zero can't be achieved by one organization, and banks need to partner with businesses that can deliver simple products and propositions that businesses of all sizes can access easily and without a drain on the existing day-to-day running challenges. So as you can see on the slide, there are a few partnerships that we have to deliver certain different objectives and financing solutions. For example, we have Decat and AppSolar for our solar solutions, with Diode and Octopus for our EV solutions, with Emisys and Purse on energy saving solutions as well. We also have done a lot of collaboration with Tesco and WWF in the agricultural sector as well. And that's where a good example where both social and climate aspects are being considered. And we continue to work collectively with Pineapple Sustainable Partnerships, Places for People, British Gas and Schneider Electric to establish a business model for large-scale delivery of retrofits. The pilot will provide useful insights into the retrofit process and it could act as a catalyst to develop supply chains and technologies to boost private sector retrofits. And very last but not least, I want to mention our partnership with Supply Chain Sustainability School as well, because education is one of the most impactful ways we can help our customers. And since November last year, we joined forces with Supply Chain Sustainability School to address climate change by building skills in the construction sector to retrofit the UK's existing housing stock and non-residential buildings. And as part of partnership, we also sponsored the development and delivery of a specific retrofit program of learning at the school that helped cultivate a more mature retrofit supply chain, share the knowledge and build the skills needed to retrofit homes and buildings across the UK. And last slide, please, James. It's about financing the transition. So I'll go into a bit more detail in terms of the different financing solutions that's available. And starting from the most straightforward, which is asset finance, and is quite often linked to the purpose of the loan as well. That's why it's a bit more straightforward. And we think it has a very, very key role to play, because quite often, but not always, they can be cheaper than a loan because, as I said, it's linked to a particular asset and a very specific purpose as well. And it could cover a broad range of sustainability-focused assets such as EV, charging infrastructure, solar panels, batteries, turbines, heat pumps, etc., etc. So one to think about if you have a need to invest in a specific asset. A great example also, in addition to that, is not in addition to the solar and EV financing that I mentioned before, is a McCain partnership that we have. And it's a very interesting concept because the solution works by providing asset finance directly to McCain farmers to finance the equipment needed for more sustainable agricultural practices. And this is how we can, it's a very good example of how they bring their relationships with their suppliers to the forefront and to the customer's attention via their marketing. Next is transition finance, which is the pink box on the right. And is how I describe transition finance is when we talk about green finance is specifically for a green purpose. And then transition finance, I would call it just simplistically olive, which is somewhere between green and brown, because we acknowledge that even if some companies, they are not entirely ready to actually deploy their green finance yet, it is important for a bank to help them to transition. And this is also what we're looking at as well. And it will become a very big topic in the future and now, and it is and also being discussed at COP as well. And next is project finance, which is a more sophisticated kind of structural lending to a more larger scale infrastructure or renewable projects. And there are other solutions as well, which something that I want to mention from the bottom. It might not be directly applicable to every business here, but I just wanted to flag that Walmart, for example, has a more direct approach, which they partner with Schneider Electric and supported some of the suppliers to group together to put in place an aggregated purchase power agreement for them to access renewable energy produced by Ørsted. So this is a good example that by suppliers grouping together, they were able to better access renewable energy than they would be able to individually. And lastly, just want to quickly mention as more kind of capital market side of things, which is the green bonds that we have as an example here as well. And there's also green use of process instruments as well that's available. With that, I'm just going to finish and then I'll pass back on to James. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Carmen. I'm just going to stop sharing. Thank you for that excellent presentation. And I see there's more questions coming in through the Q&A. Thank you for those. We'll be coming to the panel Q&A a little bit later once we've had our third and final presentation. So I'm going to invite Mayua to share his screen and pick up the conversation. You there, Mayua?
Yep, sorry, just trying to figure out how best to share my screen. If you give me 1 second, please.
Not a problem.
Is that working now?
That's coming through. Yep, that's all through fine.
Perfect.
Right. Thank you very much.
So, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Will West. I'm the Associate Director in our Sustainability and ESG Financing team, so lead on our ESG engagement across our manufacturing, industrials, infrastructure, and transport portfolios. So here to chat on kind of the key considerations on ESG financing, the different debt instruments, and key considerations. So the sustainable financing market, it broadly falls under two categories. You have your use of proceeds transactions, and your sustainability-linked transactions. So when we talk about use of proceeds here, we're talking about your green, social, sustainable transactions, where the funds are ring-fenced to finance a green or social asset, or a combination of both elements. And your sustainability-linked transactions are slightly different in the sense that they're not ring-fenced for a specific purpose, so they can be used for your general corporate purpose facilities, such as your RCFs. And this is typically done by embedding sustainability targets into the facility of the transaction based on your ESG strategy, which are then tested, and you then receive a discount or a penalty on your interest payments, depending on whether you've hit those targets in any given year. And as you can see from the graph here, the sustainable financing market boomed around 2021, and the green bonds is by far the most popular product, and financing volumes in this category have remained relatively stable since 2021. However, financing volumes more broadly have declined since then, with the second most popular product, your sustainability linked loans, experiencing a material decline since 2021. Now, each sector will have their own specific trends in the loan market, or I guess more broadly regarding that uptake on green, social, sustainability-linked transactions. But sector-wide, there has been a decline. And I think what we're experiencing here is a global divergence on underlying topics such as ESG, sustainability, and net zero. Some of this is understandable, and some is more a function of some of the wider polarization trends in politics. But SLLs have typically been the key focus here in declining headlines. So I think here is a few kind of key facts just to contextualize it. So whilst the SLL market has been down from 500 billion in 2001, which was kind of a blowout year for a novelty product, in 2024 year to date, we're seeing about 200 billion. And the decline, whilst it is significant, we are still seeing a number of names coming to market here. So this year, we have coordinated our largest SLL ever. We've also seen an uptick in flows in Q3 and Q4, which is representative of the graph here on 2024 year-to-date figures, which have overtaken 2023 levels and could potentially surpass 2002 levels as well. So we're seeing here that demand is quite elastic in this sense, and we're still seeing the likes of quite big names coming to the market here. So you've seen the likes of Heathrow and Gatwick coming to the bond market recently this year, structuring sustainability-linked bond transactions. And more broadly in the SLL market, volume reductions can be attributed to the following. So since 2021, standards have increased, which have seen transactions structured today more robust than structures of yesteryears, which has led to kind of increased costs, management decisions to perhaps not come to market here. We're seeing from the FCA's view of the market, they've highlighted a number of issues being greenwashing concerns, lack of incentives, lack of penetration in the mid-market. And these are some of the factors that we as banks probably need to work a bit towards to kind of make corporates feel a bit more comfortable coming to the market and to incentivize them to kind of accessing the market. And sustainability-linked loans are just a wider function of the loan market generally, right? So loan market conditions and maturity profiles do have taken their effect here as well. But not to be all doom and gloom, but when we look at the energy transition more broadly, and this is going to be one of the largest mega trends we're seeing for capital allocation, and this is going to need financing, right? So the use of proceed markets are going to grow, will continue to grow, and this is something that we're already seeing within the infrastructure space, where we're seeing a significant uptake in the number of green loans versus sustainability-linked loans, where corporates are dipping their toes in to finance their green capex growth, where when you consider the fact that sustainability-linked loans are typically your core financing products, so your RCFs, which are your RCF facilities, we're seeing that there's an uptick in green loans which are related to capex, which makes sense since green loans tend to attract a larger financial incentives and are kind of linked to those more capex type reasons. So despite all the noise in the sustainable financing market, we are seeing that corporates are still looking to the space and still want to transact here. We are nearing our public commitments. So I think since 2022 up to about H1 2024, we've delivered about 38 billion of cumulative sustainable financing volumes. So the market is still here to stay, and it will continue to grow. It's just more about the evolution and how it's going to change over the coming years. So there are a number of market-governed frameworks which are internationally recognized for which sustainable finance is structured against. Within the loan markets, we look towards the Loan Market Association principles. And in the bond markets, this is the International Capital Markets Association principles. And how corporates approach both markets are fairly similar. Both standards align to the same core principles you see on the slide. But for the purpose of the day, I'll just focus on the Loan Market Association principles. So when we look at the use of proceeds transactions, this is around, principle one, use of proceeds around ensuring that the asset in question falls under a green or eligible financing criteria. So at Lloyds, we do have a sustainable financing framework, which is public, which defines what activity we class as green and social. So when you look across commercial real estate, this is looking at green buildings and typically what accreditation standards, the acquisition, development, or retrofit of this building is being built towards. So the likes of EPC standards, BREEAMs, LEED, EDGE, a number of energy efficiency technologies as well. So the development, repair of technologies or development of renewable energy, and also kind of clean transformation, EV charging infrastructure. And that's just a few types of categories we do, but our SFS does publicize all categories that we qualify as green or social. Principle two is around the process for project evaluation. So how the eligible asset is communicated to be green. So looking at your ESG kind of purchasing strategy, green credentials or performance of the asset. And principle three is around the management of proceeds. So this speaks to the allocation of the funds to ensure that they're only used for the purpose of financing the green or social asset. And principle four is around the annual reporting requirements, just to attest that all three principles are true during the duration of the loan. So it's important to know with green loans that they don't have the same verification burden as sustainability-linked loans, which I'll get into a little bit more detail later on. But green loans do tend to attract a larger financial incentives as well, and they don't have that additional reporting burden. So it does make them a slightly more attractive product, depending on what your reason is for wanting to transact here. So when we look at sustainability-linked loans, these are structured against the following 5 core principles by the Loan Market Associations. Principle one is around selection of KPIs. So the chosen KPIs are supposed to be relevant and material to the business and the industry you kind of operate in to ensure that they're linked to your business's ESG strategy, objectives, and typically companies will set around 3 to 4 KPIs. I think one of the key things that banks tend to look for in this space are kind of materiality assessments, whether they have been conducted. And these are a really great way of demonstrating or communicating to lenders what your key ESG topics are on your importance to your internal, external stakeholders. It's not a necessity, but they are a really great way of kind of demonstrating what is core and material to your business. Typically nowadays, lenders will expect to see that there is a carbon KPI. So something that looks towards reducing your own operational emissions. So aligned to science as well. So typically we look towards the Science-Based Target Initiative as a gold standard for target setting, but it's a really great way of demonstrating, but it's not a necessity as well. And latest trends we are seeing in the market is that lenders are now starting to expect the inclusion of Scope 3 emissions, given its materiality more broadly across companies in the kind of infrastructure space as well. And noting that there are a number of challenges relating to data reporting and the kind of quality of data on Scope 3 emissions, there are quite innovative ways that you can look at Scope 3s, and each sector tends to have their own specific trends on how this is looked at. So when we look at the house builder sector, for example, we've taken a number of ESG leadership roles in 4 transactions in this space, so for the likes of Barratt's, or Taylor Wimpey's, or Simmons. And in the house builder sector, typically what we are seeing is that when we're looking at Scope 3 emissions, they will tend to tackle emissions looking at the sustainability of new build homes. And this is something that's really core and material to their sector. And there's a lot of focus on the E and the carbon of things, but we are seeing social KPIs in this space as well. So when you're looking at kind of construction, house builders, the infrastructure space more broadly, we are seeing social aspects being seen here. So KPIs focused on attracting new talent to the industry, improving social value generated as well, improving some of your diversity inclusion metrics as well more broadly in this space. So there are a number of ways you can look at this, and it's all very much dependent on what's core and material to your business here. Principle 2 is around the calibration of your sustainable performance targets, so your SPPs. And this is around determining and setting targets for each KPI theme, which has been identified to ensure that they are both ambitious and present a material improvement against your normal business performance. So this is typically benchmarked against your historical performance, what your peers are doing in your sector, industry and external frameworks where possible, to support you with kind of communicating and ensuring that the stretch is against best practice and regulation. And just to note, regulation is considered BAU here, as it would be disingenuous to provide a discount based on your performance that you were required by regulation to do here. So it's all about that material improvement against what you're supposed to do and what you consider your normal trajectory. Principle 3 is around loan characteristics. So unlike with green loans, the LMA principles specifies that there has to be a premium or benefit system linked to your performance against your KPIs. So typically what we're seeing in the market is that this two-way ratchet is about 2.5 to a 5 bps penalty or benefit swing. And this provides you some sort of incentives on hitting your target, so you will get a reduction in your interest payments if you hit all your KPIs, or if you do miss some of them, you might get a slight increase in your payments. And principle 4 is around reporting. So your performance around or against your KPIs and targets are to be reported on an annual basis to lenders. And principle 5 is on verification. So this is ensuring that an external or independent party verifies your performance against your sustainable performance targets on an annual basis. Typically, companies will instruct their statutory auditors to conduct this work on a limited assurance basis, but you're free to choose whoever you please. But we do recommend that when engaging on kind of sustainability linked transactions, you do engage your auditors earlier just to understand the scope and to understand the cost here. And I think more broadly speaking, we're seeing that verification is an area that some corporations are struggling with some of the high costs associated with verification. So since the release of the sustainability linked loan principles, the LMA have released additional guidance on external verification. So there are a number of ways that your lenders or ESG coordinators can work with you to ensure that your KPIs are quite closely linked to what data is already being verified for external reporting purposes here. And on some of the key benefits as to why you might want to look at kind of green financing or sustainable financing here is that there is a tangible impact through some of the small margin discounts. So with a two-way ratchet system with on sustainability linked transactions, you do get a small discount there. Green financing tends to attract larger discounts, and this will be very much dependent on the categories of the asset that is being financed. SLLs are a great way of kind of supporting improvements on internal sustainable governance due to some of the reporting and verification requirements as well. So we have seen that from the verification of some of these KPIs, they have identified gaps in the wider reporting or audit procedures of some corporations. So it is a really great way of kind of ensuring or making sure that kind of part of your reporting framework is quite robust. Being able to demonstrate or embed sustainability into your financing also allows senior stakeholders to demonstrate alignment between management, sustainability, and treasury teams on the broader corporate strategy. So it's really about embedding sustainability across your core functions here and just showing how kind of deep-rooted they are. And these are market recognized products, right? So you are able to go to market to publicize that you have got a sustainability linked loan out here to really underlie your sustainability commitments to a number of your key stakeholders, including your investors, suppliers, customers, employees, to support your wider sustainability credentials here. So just to kind of finish up here, I just wanted to highlight how this all connects back to what we're doing at Lloyds. So we do have a number of public commitments on our sustainability ambitions. As part of our Net Zero Banking Alliance commitments, we are committed to reducing the bank's finance emissions by 50% by 2030. And we do have targets across the majority of our balance sheet here across our kind of UK commercial, resi, real estate, road transport, original equipment manufacturing, aviation, agri, oil and gas, power portfolios as well. So this does cover the majority of our balance sheet. And we also do have a public commitment to our commercial banking to provide 15 billion of sustainable finance by 2024. So this is something that we achieved a year early in 2023. So I think we hit about 15.8 billion. And we do have a new target to provide 30 billion from 2024 to 2026 here. So hopefully this does give you some sort of flavor of the way banks are working with our corporates to help support their transition here, to help with financing some of their green capex growth plans, and also just how prevalent kind of the sustainable financing market is as well. And I think last slide, we do have a number of kind of comprehensive sustainability reporting standards and frameworks which are publicly available. So this highlights our approach to our sustainability reporting, our eligible sustainable financing criteria, as well as what's aligned to our broader strategy on helping Britain prosper. So I think there should be a slide circulated around, I think, links embedded here. So if you wanted to have an understanding of what green social activity we consider green, which is linked to the financing, this should all be available in our public documents. I think that takes me to the end of my slide. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you, Mayua. If I could ask the other speakers to come back on camera, please. Thank you for those presentations. I think one person commented that there was a lot of information there and more caffeine was needed. You will be getting a copy of the slides if you want to go back and read back through what you've been listening to over the last hour or so. Yes, there's lots of information. There's lots of interest in this topic. So hopefully those slides, when you get them, will be of use. And thank you for your questions in the Q&A as well. We've seen lots of them coming through. If you have any more as the conversations progress, please add them into the Q&A. We will try and get through as many of them as possible in the time that we have and the discussions that we have. So I'm going to jump straight in with a question for Ben, if I may. I'm just trying to find it because the Q&A keeps moving around quite a lot. So there's lots of good questions. About support around HVO. There was a question that was there about the price difference, essentially. Is there going to be anything done? Is there anything in the plan? Whether it's the red diesel rebate coming back in, but just for HVO as opposed to white diesel, mechanisms around the support of transition fuels such as HVO?
I don't think so, to be honest. So, I mean, we haven't seen or heard anything that there's going to be any sort of discount provided on HVO versus diesel. What makes it slightly more difficult, I think, is that the diesel price is moving quite a lot at the moment. So while HVO has been relatively steady from what I've seen for a few months, the diesel price has dropped a bit and then gone back up. So it's made it slightly more difficult. What I would say, one of the things that worked really well for us was we were looking at these 3 million litres, and the total cost of the business is quite a bit. But when you break it down to how much that's actually costing at a project level, it's a couple of £1,000s a year. So it's, you know, per site, per project, we're really not increasing the cost that much. So it's looking at it at those different levels that helps to make it a bit more acceptable and palatable when you're discussing it internally.
Super. Thanks, Ben.
And for the only thing I'd say on, I was going to just say, I answered another question asking what the criteria are, and I put the link to the supply chain school report, which goes through all the procurement guidance for people to have a look at.
Super. And I was going to say something similar to that. We're going to share a slide at the end, which has the links to a couple of papers that the school has done recently, one of which is on HVO. Clearly, there's a lot of interest in that. I'm also going to ask my colleague Alice in the background if you can get the link for the webinar that we did. We had a virtual conference back in June on HVO, which linked to the report that Ben has just referred to. We'll pop that link in the chat box as well, so you can click through and watch that back if you're interested in HVO specifically. Okay, a question for Carmen, if I may. You talked about the carbon planner tool. Does it also measure both embodied carbon and operational emissions? And there's a kind of rejoinder question on that in terms of the sources of the emission factors.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yes, so it does calculate your operational emissions. So this is our first iteration. That's why we kind of use the kind of manufacturing sector as kind of like a prototype. But we're actually doing a lot of enhancement to it to go into more of the in-depth analysis per sector. So I think there's a question on embodied emissions, etc. That is something that we're looking to develop, but we're looking into the next iteration and planning to launch next year into more sector specific factors as well, but definitely operations, because at the moment, to help the smaller scale customers, I think the key is not to go into too much detail and talking about the confidence and credibility point that Ben mentioned previously as well. It's just about actually getting the right data to start with, having the confidence in those basic data, get the basics right, and then we go into the more specific details in terms of the measurement.
Super. Thanks, Carmen. In terms of data, I'm going to come to one of the other questions that Lewis has posed in a minute, and I'll come back to Ben for that one about measurement, in particular for plant and equipment. But first, I'll go to Mayua. There's a question here about the difference between your green bonds and your sustainability bonds. I think you touched upon it a little bit in your presentation, but if you could clarify the difference between those, that would be helpful.
Yeah, no, of course. So green bonds are where the underlying asset has a green focus, whereas a sustainable bond is where it's a mix of social and green. So it's just a combination of both elements there. Then there's a slight nuance that you have your sustainability linked, which are kind of KPI driven there. So apologies, I didn't clarify the difference between sustainable and sustainability linked. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. Great. Thank you very much. Yes, and Ben, if I could come back to you, I'm just looking for Lewis's question. Apologies, people. There are lots of questions to look through. There's a question about I think it's about the reporting burden. Lewis is from the Construction Plant Hire Association. Hi, Lewis. Good to see you again. The question here about carbon accounting. It's the admin, it's the cost, it's the time that comes with the requirement to collect data and then provide it on for another reason. Obviously, today we're talking about climate finance.
Yeah, absolutely. So my best suggestion, I think, would be to go and use the supply chain full carbon tool for calculating this in the first instance, because that is quite simple. And that's, James, that's openly available to anybody that's a member of the school, isn't it, in their supply chain? So you can go in, put in your volume of fuel that you've used, other bits and pieces, and calculate your carbon footprint. So that'll give you sort of operational carbon footprint, scope 1 and 2. And I know there's work around sort of embodied carbon materials and other pieces that's going on, isn't it? But I would suggest that's the best place to go. And that's sort of the route that we as tier ones and clients are trying to get our supply chains to use. So if you go in there and calculate your carbon footprint once, we as a client can then see, how much carbon you've produced. And if we are providing 20% of your revenue, let's say, we can take 20% of your carbon footprint into our own scope 3 footprint. So that's probably the best way to do it. We're still trying to get traction and trial that and work out how best to use it as Kia, but I think that's probably my best suggestion.
Super, thanks, Ben. And just to kind of build on that a little bit, as Ben was saying, the Supply Chain School provides a free to access carbon calculator tool. It's called the Carbon Calculator, and it's aimed at those smaller businesses who are maybe don't have the bandwidth to have their own sustainability team in-house to go and calculate that data. It's an online platform. You plug your liters, your kilowatts in, and so on. You crank the handle, and it gives you a number. So yeah, if you search for that through the school's website, you will find that. Okay, there's a question here. I'm going to come to Carmen for this one, please. It's around the role of public sector in encouraging sustainable finance and the transition overall. As I mentioned at the beginning of my kind of spiel at the top of the webinar, there's a mixed bag here. There's private finance, there's government finance, there's world development banks, more and more and more as well. How do you see the kind of the public sector role in this?
Yeah, so thank you so much, James. I think that's a really good question. And I think to start with, before we go into the finance, I think the policy signals is very important, and that comes from the public sector. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the financial flow, but I think the policy signals is very important, and giving businesses the clarity and the certainty, especially when we talk about investment that's spanning, over 5-7 years, etc. Then we need that clarity, and businesses need that to have the confidence to invest in a certain technology. So that's the first thing. But in terms of financing as well, I would see that the public and private sectors actually play a very complementary role together. And then I would say that, for example, if you look at, it depends on which spectrum you're at. If you're talking about from a research and development perspective, then I think grant funding would be more suited. Then we talk about there is grant funding from, for example, Innovate UK, UK Research and Innovation, and there's a Clean Growth Fund as well, which is a venture capital fund that's established by the UK government. So the public sector would play a bigger role in there at that kind of beginning spectrum of the development. And then you go to emerging, being like, more of the frontier investments that are higher risk for private finance as well. you need equity investments, then the public sector would probably play a bigger role in there as well. And that is not to say that, you know, there are some financial institutions actually have the kind of equity investment arm as well, just to kind of facilitate that, to kind of bridge it to the more mature financing, which is the debt financing, which is cheaper because you need to balance the kind of the risk and reward. And then we talk about high growth, like, you know, the next stage of the development as well. Then we're looking at debt and equity, right? And that is where the British Business Bank will play a role. The UK Export Finance will play a role, and the UK Infrastructure Bank, or now the National Wealth Fund, will play a role in there as well from the high growth. So they would provide, you know, an array of the equity and debt kind of solution to it, and then all the way to maturity businesses, which are basically, you know, you're looking at debt and guarantees from the government as well. So I would say that, you know, actually they should complement each other. And then for a lot of the projects, we do work with a lot with BBB and UKEF and also UK Infrastructure Bank. And we also advise the National Wealth Fund. And we're part of the task force as well to try to shape that, because they did announce, you know, and, you know, there is probably another question about, is there a funding gap in the transition as well? Yes, absolutely there is, but we're moving in the right direction in terms of the government. Now the National Wealth Fund has about 28 billion, and then try to basically be used as a catalyst for private funding as well. And I think that's a very good start. But are we, you know, do we have enough? I don't think so. But then that's why we need to be more focused, make sure that the money flows to the most kind of imminent and flow to the most impactful areas.
Super, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Carmen. I'm going to come to Mayua for the next question. This is a question from Bakir. Hi, Bakir. Could you provide a ballpark minimum investment value for green finance that would be of interest? What's the entry point that you would be looking at from Lloyd's point of view? And same question to Carmen as well.
Yeah, of course, and it very much depends on what the asset in question you're trying to finance here, and I think it's one to probably speak to relationship managers in your bank. I don't have a particular entry level here, but we work with all our kind of corporate clients to help them kind of in this transition, right? So if you do have a green asset that you're looking to finance or a new initiative here, if it does meet our kind of green eligibility criteria for them, we will definitely work with you to kind of find the best solution to kind of financing whatever it is that's you require that additional debt for. So I don't have a ballpark figure, but it's we'll work our best to kind of support you with that.
Cool. Yeah, Carmen.
Yeah, I agree with Mayua as well, is that you know, green finance should be seen as like any other finance. That's, you know, if a company needs financing from a bank, I don't think there should be an entry level. So we serve customers from the very small scale businesses to the very large corporates as well. So I think is more about going to your banker to kind of state your needs, and then obviously we'll try our best to help you to facilitate that.
Thank you. Ben, I'm going to come to you next with a question that's very much focused on the construction sector here about your advice for a company. Sorry, trying to read it and someone's just popped in another question. This is the joys of Zoom, I'm afraid, folks. So let me push back up to that one. Here you go. Advice for a company with a lot of construction projects on how best to implement a low carbon concrete strategy. So you're pouring a lot of carbon, you've got a lot of offsite, precast. Yeah,
I did see that one, and it's difficult without knowing specifics some of the time because it's different by project. What I would say is what I kind of said in the presentation is get involved early and look at ways to reduce the amount of concrete you're actually using, not just swapping out for a low carbon cement replacement. And then, but you can also focus on that cement replacement if it's in a non-structural application. So if you've got walls that are around that development or some other non-structural use, then focus on those because that'll give you your sort of first test bed of using those different cement replacement products and start to get some buy-in beyond sustainability professionals. I think that'd be my best.
Thanks, Ben. And shameless plug for the school again, but it's free, so I'm allowed to do that. There's lots of great content on low carbon concrete. We've done recently in September, we did a analogous webinar on low carbon steel and all the efforts around that from a production point of view, but also from a design point of view as well. So yeah, great advice. Thanks, Ben. Actually, I'll stay with you, Ben, for the next question, then I'll put the same question back to Carmen and Mayua as well. It's about best practice for communicating unknown risks and unknown costs We're into the world of known unknowns and unknown knowns and so on when it comes to talking to your senior leadership. So I'm sensing that in between the lines here, we're talking about the leadership have got the influence and the decision making, but they don't know all the detail. How do you get that across?
So was this the question that was asking particularly about climate adaptation?
It was, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, for a large business, we've worked with a consultancy to help us do some scenario modeling to sort of look at what's going to happen in the future and try to understand, you know, if our climate warms by 1.5 degrees, what are the likely impacts? If it's going to be by 2, if it's going to be by 6, you know, how does that impact us over the slightly longer term? What I would say is, you know, you don't have to be really, really specific on these risks and opportunities. You can kind of get a good feel to say, we know that there's going to be more rainfall in the winter, it's going to be warmer and wetter. We know it's going to be hotter and drier in the summer. We know that the southeast is going to be particularly impacted by hot, dry weather in the summer, and we know that, you know, Scotland and the northwest are going to get a lot of rain. So if you have a look at some of that sort of publicly available stuff that the Met Office have done around scenario modelling, you can have a look regionally and just try to understand what those big climate risks are going to be and start to understand how you mitigate those. So in the construction sector, if you were to look at PIA's TCFD disclosure in our annual report, you'll see that the big physical risks are surface water runoff and increased rainfall, hot, dry summers. You know, there's some of these things that are coming and are starting to actually hit our businesses now, and you can feel it. You don't need to have a really specific quantified risk assessment. If you did want to go and look at some of the data, I think it's the there's a website called UKCP, which gives you some maps and starts to give you some sort of free scenario modelling, which looks at, oh, sorry, it's the UK Climate Risk Indicators. I've actually written it down, I'll find it. So you can look at the maps on there and you can see the sort of fire risk or the flood risk or the heat risks that are coming through. So you can look at your own locations and understand how you're going to get impacted.
Yeah, that's great. And there's a global equivalent of that one. There's a kind of a fire risk one if you've got investments or facilities elsewhere in the world, particularly on fire, the risk of wildfires. There's various resources out there that are free to access. Carmen, if you'd like to pick up on that point about the communication piece around climate adaptation with senior leadership.
Yeah, sure. I agree with Ben. We also do a lot of scenario analysis as well with our economists, and just based on, you know, different scenarios and different sources of analysis as well. I think, you know, what Ben alluded to, I think is a range of outcome then we need to work towards. So there's no certainty that, you know, a certain mark is going to be hit, but we know that there is a certain, you know, higher confidence of certainty of a range of outcome. And that is something that, like, how we could communicate to the leaders and seniors and the decision makers as well. And I also think that, just kind of leaning on Ben's point as well, that's why I mentioned the science-based targets at the beginning, is if we make it as science-based as possible, so as to make it more subjective and credible, etc., and data driven. So I think, you know, no one knows the exact outcome in the future, right? But then we need to make an informed decision. So we have to rely on data, we have to rely on the science to do that. And also, I think one of the key message is that we can't be absolutely ready before we take the action. I think that's the thing. It's just basically, you know, we can't have certainties of everything before we take the action and the investment decisions. So let's just, you know, try our best based on what we could, based on the data that we know, give a range of outcomes, and then a recommendation of, like, where our investment should be. And one of the other thing that might help, apart from scenario analysis, is the estimated insurance cost. I think particularly talking about physical risk and adaptation finance as well, because surely we can use that, you know, somehow use that as a proxy to estimate what the cost would be. If we can actually look at, for example, if your insurance quote, if you've done this implementation, your insurance cost would have come down, then that is quite a tangible way of showing the financial benefits of your adaptation measures as well.
That's cool. I mean, if you want to pick up on that point from your experience about communicating that kind of scenario approach to senior management and senior leadership, that this is the best information we have and the best analysis we have. We're never going to be 100% correct because there's things that the unknown unknowns. How your experiences on that?
Yeah, no, of course, and this is slightly outside the remit of what I do, but more broadly, we have a number of different kind of ESG teams internally that kind of look at this in a little bit more detail than I do. But it's about having that kind of data first and data driven perspective, right? Being science aligned where possible. I think it's really important to appreciate that whilst it's kind of good to be science aligned where possible, this is an art, right? We're never going to get it 100% right. So there needs to be a layer of transparency involved with communicating these and informing, providing the right information to the right stakeholders to make an informed decision here. So at the time we are making these decisions, it's do we have the best possible data in front of us to help inform our decision making, and just being adaptable over time as kind of the landscape changes, the markets change, things are going to change, and it's how can you kind of be robust and adaptable to the changing environment to allow you to keep having the best information in front of you to make those kind of best data in front of you to make the right decisions. That's my take.
I think I think you've just summed up a phrase that seems to be one of the time, which is don't let great be the enemy of good. So let's make some progress. Mayu, if I can just stay with you for the next question. And I don't think I fully understand the question, so hopefully you will. It's a question on green bonds. Are you seeing a significant difference in the basis points compared to standard bonds? And then something around the governance there, talking about green taxonomy, or the UK's version of green taxonomy.
Okay, yeah. So I sit in the loan market side of things. So we have a separate ESG team that looks at the capital markets and bond issuances. But more broadly, I can give my little what I do know here. But more broadly, I think initially there used to be this kind of green premium, the greenium on green bonds, which we used to see where there used to be a slight variance in the premium payments made or low on yields on bonds. That used to be a thing further down the line around the 2021 areas. We're seeing little evidence of this greenium still being in existence till today. So there isn't as much evidence to suggest that there is that kind of difference in premiums on kind of your vanilla bonds and green bonds. But we are seeing that investors are caring a lot more about what companies are doing as part of their transition and how they can kind of supporting that transition to a kind of greener economy there. So whilst it's not necessarily as reflected in that premium, it's still something that investors are looking towards when they are going to the bond market and do care about. And yeah.
Super, thank you. So there can be some difference there, but it does vary. Super, thank you. There's a great question from Tracy here about loans versus grants. Carmen, if I could come to you first of all, and then maybe to Ben from your perspective. A lot of the discussion today has been talked about loan finance. What about government-funded grant schemes, particularly for SMEs supporting decarbonisation initiatives? How obviously different mechanisms for climate finance. How do they contrast and compare?
I'm not the expert in grants, but I'll try my best to answer a question, and then I'll defer to Ben to answer that. So I think my understanding of that is that, as I kind of mentioned before, I think is a spectrum of the maturity of your project. So I would say that like the riskier project, I think we tend to, the company should go for the grant in terms of, because if you look at loan, what loan does is basically you get an upfront piece of money, but you need to pay interest and then also pay it back at the end of the period. And ultimately, from a very basic and fundamental point of view, the bank would want their money back, right? So I think that's the question is, so basically the more mature the project, the more likely that you will get debt funding. And the less mature the project, then you are likely to get grant and also or equity investment. But then obviously there would be a grant is, I don't think they necessarily expect a return, but equity does. They expect a higher return over time. So I think that's how I would kind of distinguish that. And I think that is one of the barrier of financing less mature technologies as well. Is that, apologies for the background noise, by the way. I noticed there's a question on it. I just want to explain that I'm having some technical nightmare this morning, and this is the best setup that I could get. So sorry about that.
We can hear you fine, Carmen. It's fine.
Yeah, thank you. So I think so from a bank's perspective, for the less mature technology, for example, it's actually very difficult to look at it from a bank's perspective in a very traditional risk and return point of view, because a lot of the risk is unknown, and that's why we need the policy signals. For example, if you look at wind farm technologies, like 20 years ago, it was more of an unknown, and that's why the government did a very good job in setting the contract for difference pricing corridor to give certainty to that. So from a financier point of view, this actually gives us certainty in terms of, okay, this energy can be sold for a certain amount for certain. even the technology is less certain. And that is the bridge to basically from maybe equity financing or grant to debt, because there's more of a certainty of return. And that's something that we need to see a bit more from a bank's perspective as well. Do we need to test our appetite a bit more? Or some of the banks, like I said, have set up the equity investment arms as well. But I think from a bank's perspective, it doesn't mean that you have to go for one or the other. You can go for both, right? So I think maybe from bank's perspective as well, we can help our customer to understand what their options are for the grants as well. I think that's one of the roles that we could play.
Super, thank you, Carmen. And Ben, your views on the grant versus loan, or how they work symbiotically?
Yeah, so again, I'm not an expert in this anymore either. So having worked in sort of public sector and supporting small businesses in the past, historically there were quite a lot of grants available to decarbonise and to look at building sustainable business models. It's been 10 years since I worked in that sector though, so I'm really not sure how much there is left anymore out there. And as sort of public finances have tightened, so have the grants a little bit. There definitely is money available for innovation, so sort of UK research do provide a bit of financing. But again, I'm not close enough to it to really comment on it too much. What I would say is a really positive step is we're starting to see the public sector take a lead on this. So they're putting decarbonisation incentives into contracts. So if you were to have a look at Construct Zero, they're starting to, there's sort of 5 client carbon commitments, and one of those is to start putting incentives into contracts so that contractors do get a repayment for decarbonising their operations. And the same with sort of the public procurement notes. So we're seeing, so PPN 0124 is starting to put those sort of carbon reduction contractual commitments into contracts for delivering public sector work. So we will see that come from the public sector through organisations like here and down into our supply chain, where we pass on those incentives to be able to sort of contribute to decarbonising operations.
Cool, that's great. Thank you. So it will be interesting to see how that develops and evolves over the coming term with the relatively new government we have in the UK, and how that develops. I'm going to move back onto some probably more standard territory here. There's a great question from Cara about, as data is evolving, as we get to understand more about the data, particularly scope 3, it's a bit like peeling back an onion. You peel back, you find another layer of data, and you probably cry as well. You find that there's more information and more accuracy that you need. How do we manage those fluctuations in data is Cara's question, when it comes to the investment choices we're talking about. The fact that we're getting better data, more data. Ben, if I could come to you first, and then I'll come to you next.
Yeah, so we're in a position where a lot of our scope 3 data, particularly, is spend based. So, you know, it does change year on year as we improve the accuracy of it. And I think we just need to accept that if we need to rebaseline, we will rebaseline. We've documented, you know, the sort of the trigger points where if our footprint changes by a certain amount, we will rebaseline, or we will restate, so that we are comparing apples with apples. Because it is important you do have that sort of straight line. But I think everybody is in the same position that scope 3 is about calculating the total emissions and identifying where you've got really big sources where you can take action. It's not about being all that accurate. If you were to look at the Financial Times each year publishes a league table of climate leaders across Europe, and they ask you to report your scope 3 data, but they don't measure you on reduction in scope 3. All they're looking for is that you're disclosing it and you're being open in it and you're improving the quality of data. So it's more about that. Quantify it, improve the quality, work out where you need to focus to cut it, rather than being accurate down to the kilogram, which, you know, increasingly we can be on scope 1 and 2 because we've got much greater control and much more insight into the data.
Yeah, definitely. It's that point again. It's getting a sense of where the hotspots are and actually doing something about them, rather than worrying about the accuracy to 10 decimal places. Miura, from your point of view on that data side, when you're looking at investments, the ever-changing landscape of particularly scope 3 data.
Yeah, no, of course, and I think there's an appreciation by kind of banks more broadly that scope 3 emissions is just really difficult to kind of report on, quantify. You have a number of different kind of corporations within your supply chain and getting the right accurate level of data is quite difficult, right? So when we are looking at working with our corporates on sustainability-linked loans, and we are working with corporates on Scope 3 emissions, there is that understanding that it is difficult. So I think there are a number of different ways that we are supporting our clients who are approaching target setting within facilities on Scope 3. I think it comes back to what Ben was saying here. It's understanding what your hotspots are and what your most material hotspots are, and making action against those and doing them right. And again, it comes back to transparency as well. We've set facilities, or we've worked with some of our corporates where they have set targets on their Scope 3, but as their data reporting requirements or data reporting processes have improved and have led to kind of increased knowledge on where their Scope 3 emissions are, it's then got them into a position that, hold up, actually, you know what? We thought this back in 2021. Things have now changed in 2023. We need to come back to the table with the lenders to reevaluate or reshape or rebase our targets based on what we do know now. And there are a number of provisions within the documentation phase of your sustainability-linked loan. So the LMA have released their model provisions on what should be included. And there's this language around what we call a rendezvous clause, which allows lenders and the corporates to come back to the table in the event that there is a material change in your calculation methodology or your definitions of KPIs, which allows lenders and kind of corporates to have this really honest conversation about rebasing targets if there is that material change. So it's I think it comes down to that transparency and understanding what your hotspots are and doing what you can now. It's an ever-evolving landscape. Things are going to change, and it's just having that appreciation that could be the case and just having that honest conversation, right?
Super. Thanks, Mayua. And my next question's for Carmen. It's like, following that kind of theme of uncertainty, or data changing and moving a little bit, it's not nailed down on a plank. What's your position when it comes to kind of more innovative technologies? The question was specifically about carbon capture and storage, but how you think about investing in some of those novel or things that have not fully been scaled up, they're still at pilot scale potentially, how you look at those compared to more conventional technologies, should we say?
Yeah, so we have tried to establish, like the spectrum that we talked about before, we tried to establish buckets of funds that we could support across the spectrum of the maturity. So, for example, we have a venture capital fund, and that's not just limited to climate, but like on technology development as well, which is slightly riskier. So we're looking at specific pockets where we can maybe push the risk appetite envelope a bit more. And then those are the areas that we'll look at. Actually, carbon capture from a technology point of view is not necessarily riskier because it's quite a known technology, but it's just the use case is the offtake, and it is a use case of, okay, what is the revenue stream coming from it as well? That is like, if you look at it from a lending point of view, that could be a bit challenging. And that is when we need to, when we recognize that there is a need to support this type of technology. They might not be mature enough. And by the way, it takes about 4 or 5 years to build. So we can't wait for it to be mature and then start funding it. So I think what we do with it is that we have a specific designated bucket of funds that we can use against those less mature technology, that we say, okay, let's look at it together. There's need to help and support in that area. Let's look at it together and see how we could do that and push our kind of risk appetite envelope a bit further than we would normally do.
So there's something here about pump priming certain new technologies potentially to give them the impetus that they potentially need. Yeah. Okay, super. Thank you. Ben, I'm going to come to you for the next question. A couple of members of the audience have talked about BREEAM and LEED and various different certificates and awards that you can get, and that those might be used as the condition on which you get funding, or the part of your funding is dispersed. Your views on that, your experiences from Kia and how that works. I mean, the education sector was named as one example.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing increasing focus on net zero. Actually, before I answer this one, I accidentally deleted a question which kind of asked this earlier as well. So I was trying to answer it and clicked the wrong button and deleted it. So I will answer this one as well at the same time. Around if clients are asking for net zero as well, and yes, they are. So, like I said, 70% just about of our revenue comes from projects with a net environmental benefit. We're being asked for BREEAM or EPCA, low embodied carbon builds, climate adapted projects, all those sorts of things. What I would, depends on your business, I suppose. For Kia, we're very diverse. We couldn't set a term around just BREEAM or just net zero, because we deliver projects like the one behind me, the lower water restoration project. So that's creating salt marsh to compensate for sea level rises and us losing that intertidal habitat. So we delivered that for the Environment Agency. But we're also working for people like Severn Trent Water to build sustainable drainage ponds around Mansfield so that the sewage treatment works aren't overwhelmed. So there's loads of different sustainable projects. And what I would say is, don't funnel down too much onto a condition like BREEAM. I would keep it at a certified or a scheme like we use the FTSE Russell Green Revenue Classification Scheme for the London Stock Exchange Green Economy Mark. You could use the EU taxonomy. We could use the UK taxonomy if and when it arrives. You know, so there's plenty of opportunities, I think, to look at certification, and it's great because it does prove that you're delivering a sustainable project. But I wouldn't get too much into the weeds about which one.
Yeah, there's a good point there about having equivalence as well. You know, good public procurement always says you cannot name a specific label or standard. You can talk about it meets, it aligns with, but not necessarily stipulate that specific one. Okay, super. Thank you, Ben. There's a question here that's quite detailed. So I'm going to, Carmen, if you can pick this one up first, and then maybe you afterwards, about if a project's got some KPIs about increasing the recycled material that's used within the project, and therefore circular economy, how that would qualify for green finance. Could that be included in the scope of the investment potentially?
I'll tackle it from kind of more of a loan point of view and our propositions point of view, and I think you can probably tackle it more from the kind of like financing instrument point of view. So that there is a concept called avoided emission that we start to look at, but unfortunately it hasn't really been fully recognized in the target setting bodies like the SBTI, for example, because, you know, we will also look at energy from waste plants, for example, and those waste that is used to generate energy, obviously there's emission that's attached to it, but then actually it would have been a lot more if it goes to the landfill. So how do we measure that? And that is kind of like, you know, like our scope 3 discussion is like, you know, once you peel the one layer of the onion, we discover another layer of kind of data and measurement challenges that we're facing. So I think in terms of circularity, it is quite a challenge in terms of calculating those avoided emission. So whilst I said that there is no kind of overall very solid standard that's recognizing how to account for those, I think that is definitely an element of consideration when we're approaching from a loan perspective as well. So, you know, it's just, given that it's difficult to quantify, it's quite difficult to basically pinpoint a financial benefit to it, but I think it's certainly a positive to include in there. And I think as time goes, because, you know, when we speak to the kind of governing bodies, et cetera, in looking at those avoided emissions, you know, we do take that into account. So I think it's developing, and we definitely take that into account, but not sure quite how there's a standard way of doing it yet. And if you look at a lot of the kind of waste management companies, actually, there's a quite established way of doing that already. And I think that could, you know, if you look at the larger scales one in the company, I think we can take some clue in there as well.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Carmen. Yeah, this kind of comes into the world of comparative life cycle assessment, different EPDs, that kind of thing, specifically to the question that was about concrete. Miua, the view from Lloyd's on this in terms of how you look at that avoided emission, you know, we're doing something that's better than business as usual.
Yeah, no, of course, and I'll tackle this from a green loans perspective first, then probably go on to the sustainability link side thing. So on kind of circular economy, adaptable products, processes, technologies and processes, this is something that we definitely do support and can finance. So in our in our sustainable financing framework, under our green eligibility criteria, this does fall under our kind of eligibility activities. So production of kind of resource efficient or low carbon products that are sort of certified or have the kind of right green credentials here. So it's definitely something that is encouraged and can be used towards green financing. When you look to sustainability linked loans and we start to think about it from shaping a KPI around this. This is something that we have seen in the market as well. So from a manufacturing perspective, we have seen KPIs focused on increasing the percentage of recycled materials as part of the production processes to help kind of drive down that emissions of the use of so products portions as well, reduction of kind of the use of virgin materials in your production processes. So there are a number of ways that these circular economy themes can be embedded into the different types of financing structures. And again, it will just come down to what is core and material to your business and to your sector. So if there is particular focus on the reduction of kind of virgin materials in your specific processes or increased use of these recycled materials, and that is core and it's very demonstrable that this is core to what you're doing from a sustainability link perspective, that's something that can definitely be incorporated on that. And again, read across to the green loan side if the asset is focused on that and it does have the right credentials behind it.
Super, thanks, Miura. We're getting to the last quarter hour of the webinar, so I'm going to take a slightly different tack now with the questions. We've had some quite detailed questions on HVO and on bond debt structures and other phrases such as that. I'm going to take a slightly different tack in terms of some of the other questions we've had here. There's one question specifically for for Carmen and Miura about the actions that your respective employers are taking in developing nations, what the support is there around the topic that we're talking about now. And it's clearly a big topic in COP29 as well, how those actions are not just UK based, but elsewhere. So Carmen, if I maybe come to you first, please.
Thank you. So NatWest is a predominantly UK-based bank. So actually, you know, on that question, the answer would be a bit limited from that point of view. So we're very focused on championing the businesses and actually our retail customers in the UK. We only have a very selective portfolio in Europe and also in the US as well. And a lot of them are actually on renewable projects, for example. So we're being very selective elsewhere as well from a kind of funding point of view. So I think what we do in that respect is probably limited to our footprint. But the kind of purpose and intention is there. And I think if we focus on our local economy, I think we do believe that we can do a lot of good in there as well.
Yeah, and within that, I can hear you talking about social value, which is a topic for another webinar, a great topic, but not for today. Miura, from your point of view, from Lloyd's point of view, that question about overseas support. I don't think he can hear me at the moment. Maybe his sound has dropped. Yeah, I don't think he can. Okay, we'll move on to another question for the moment. We'll have all seen the news in the last couple of weeks, the change of government that's going to happen in January in the US. Ben, I'm going to throw this one at you first of all, if I may, please. Just your wider view. We're getting a bit more global here, of course. You know, what the view is in terms of how that might ripple through what we're talking about. Just before you come to that, to give you a second to think about it, is the quote from John Podesta, the US envoy from the Biden administration in Baku, saying it's not going to have much effect really. This is a big issue. It's here to stay. It's bigger than the 4-year term that they have in the US, and we'll be doing lots at a state level, if not at a federal level.
Yeah. I kind of feel the same. I think. I mean, it's not great for sustainability. I don't think Donald Trump would even say that, you know, he's going to support cutting carbon, but the rest of the world's going to keep going. It's going to keep moving forward. The risk is for America that, yes, they might see some short-term benefits from oil and gas and fossil fuels and onshoring, but they're going to get left behind as the rest of the world decarbonizes. And, you know, as we move away from using fossil fuels over the next decade or two, the UK and Europe and Asia and the rest of the world that's taking action is going to be in a very different place. So it's more of a risk for them, I think, than a risk for us. It's not going to help us to decarbonize any quicker, but in terms of, you know, our transition to a low carbon economy, it's not going to stop the UK, it's not going to stop Europe or Asia from moving in that direction. So
yeah, they'll be left behind is kind of what you're implying.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, I think so.
Interesting. Miura, can you hear us? You're back. Great.
Yeah.
Did you want to?
No
No worries. did you want to pick up the previous question about how Lloyds is investing and supporting outside of the UK?
Yeah, of course. A similar response to Carmen here. I think Lloyds are a very UK-centric bank, right? So we do have a little bit of balance sheet out in the US and in Europe, but we're predominantly a UK bank, which does, again, limit my response to this question here. But I guess if I reframe this slightly to probably apply a bit more of a just transitionary lens to things and how we can support from a UK perspective on the just transition and kind of ensuring that we are transitioning in a just and equitable way that provides kind of access to the right sort of resources from an environmental perspective to people within the UK. I think a new partnership which we have just announced with the National Wealth Fund, I think quite recently, to provide 500 million of new funding to support the retrofit of social housing within the UK. So I think this marks the first investment since the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, announced that the UK infrastructure bank would be transformed to the National Wealth Fund. So Lloyds, alongside Barclays, will be delivering 500 million of lending to the market to enable kind of financial guarantees and to support with championing social housing and to support with kind of clean energy growth industries and kind of providing and delivering warmer, greener homes for kind of social tenants. So whilst because of how our capital is deployed in the different areas, we don't necessarily have that kind of wider impact there, but there is a key focus within the UK on ensuring that transition is done in a really just way.
Super. And I think that's a great segue, totally unplanned, but thank you, Miyu, for the final question, which is about sustainability and net zero and kind of the legacy. So the developed nations of the world, the global north, the west, however you want to phrase it. So the countries, but also the companies within those, how we have an obligation to the developing nations and the global south for what we're talking about here. How do we see that as that historical legacy that we should pick up on as part of that just transition message that you just mentioned? Carmen, if I could come to you with that one first, please, and then I'll go around the panel.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, yeah, I think I totally agree with the just transition principle, right? So even if we just look at Scotland, for example, how we transition from like the traditional kind of fossil fuel economy to the renewable economy, for example, which we're absolutely very well positioned to do. So I think in terms of from your question on the legacy point of view, I think the key thing is to make sure that we stick to the right guiding principles. So like, you know, our just transition principles, etc. And there is a lot of unknown out there in terms of, we talk about scope 3, we talk about the scenario analysis, etc. But, you know, even the science target that we're setting, actually, we're supposed to reset every 2 years as well, because that is to acknowledge the fact that the SBTI requires us to reset it every 2 years. It's because just to acknowledge the fact that actually things are changing. We can't wait for everything to be set in stone before we start our action. So let's start acting together. Let's start, you know, to try our best to do what we can do, but then we can iterate over time. I think that is, as long as we stick to that right just transition principle and to help our economy to thrive and our customers to thrive, I think we'll get there. I think we'll have the right legacy, but we really can't be just be a bystander. We just kind of need to work together on that. And with, for example, like if we look at the supply chain analysis, that actually I think 60%, we've done an analysis on some companies, actually 60% of our customers have supply chain go globally anyway. So even though we're saying that we're supporting our UK economy, but actually by influencing what they do and helping them to support them in their transition journey, we are actually indirectly helping the global economy to move in the right direction already. So that's what we're hoping to do.
Great, thanks, Carmen. Ben, from your point of view.
Yeah, I agree with everything Carmen said. I kind of think we need to look forwards and not backwards all the time. Yes, the West has a big responsibility to do more and to lead the way and to develop the technologies and sort of be responsible for what we've done in the past. And we should give developing nations time to catch up. So one of the things that I heard at an event a little while ago was a sustainability director effectively stand up and say, why should we bother doing anything because China's putting loads of coal power plants out? And it's like, well, yeah, but cumulatively, the UK, Europe, the US has still emitted massive more carbon emissions than China is at the moment. And when you look at renewable installs, China's got more renewable energy capacity than any other country in the world. Probably got 5 or 6 times more than the US, which is number 2. So I think, you know, we need to take a responsible position. We should be doing more because it's the right thing to do and we have a responsibility to, but also because it provides an opportunity for the UK and developed nations as well. So there is a business opportunity there. But we all have a past. Developing nations have a past. The developed West has a past. We should be responsible for it, but we do need to look forward and see where we can actually have the biggest impact and make the biggest difference, I think.
Super. Thank you, Ben. And Mayua, just for you to give your view.
Yeah, no, of course. And similar to what Carmen said and echoing, I think we have a lot of large corporations that do have really global supply chains, right? So it's how can we support them in ensuring that there is that kind of trickle down effect. And when you look on a global lens and you look at the type of technologies that are going to be required globally to help with that transition, it's how can we support our clients in scaling the right technologies that will not only be useful to what's going to be required in the UK, but more broadly, right? So it's ensuring that we're framing our investment decisions and products that we're creating to what do our customers need that helps them along that journey, and ensuring that there is that kind of trickle down effect later down the line that ensures that everybody has access to these technologies to be able to decarbonize when it's right for them to, noting that there is that kind of developmental lag in certain and different nations, right? So looking towards, I quite like the carbon markets at times because it does have that ability to provide finance on nature-based solutions across different geographies, right? It's allowing your corporates to purchase these credits, which are then kind of funnel down to your people in different nations, and to be able to have that input and supporting them on that journey. So that's just my little 2 cents.
Super. Thank you, Mayua.
I guess. I'm in England.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen while I just do the closing bit. I just want to say thank you to my 3 speakers today, to Carmen, to Ben and Mayua, and for all the questions from you in the audience, and well done to my speakers for managing all of those that do come thick and fast. What you're now looking on the screen is the QR codes, the 2 of the reports that we've mentioned, particularly the HVO one, but also one on solar panels. Very relevant to the conversation today around moving to a lower zero carbon world, but also doing that in a just fashion. Both of those reports talk more than just the environmental green credentials of those two products, those 2 power sources. They very much look into the sustainability, the wider human aspect of them as well. I'll leave that on the screen just while I do the closing messages if you want to grab the QR codes. Please do fill in the feedback form. It's our usual plan, do, check, act within the supply chain school. Tell us what you like, what else you think we should be talking about in our virtual conferences, what we could do better. I've already had one person telling me that this is not working properly, so I'll be on Amazon later, or other websites are available to get a new headset. So please fill that in. The link should be in the chat box from my colleague Alice, and if not, it'll be distributed later for you to fill in. It's a really simple form. It will take you 30 seconds to click a few radio buttons, but it's really valuable for us. Other than that, thank you for your time today. Again, thank you to my speakers. We've got a packed schedule for the supply chain school, so there are lots of other virtual conferences going on throughout the year, and then smaller lunch and learn events as well. So do have a look on the school's website and you'll find out what events you can join up for. And of course, they're always free. So thank you for your time. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you sometime soon. Thank you for now.